This is the 3D VIEW-MASTER adventure, Land of the Giants. VIEW-MASTER Reel 1. Picture 1. Suborbital spaceflight is a fact. There's not a city on Earth that cannot be reached in 1 hour's flying time. Flight 612, the LA to London rocket run, is a scheduled 41-minute ride from ignition to touchdown. It's 1983. 100 miles above the surface of our small planet, passengers relax, much as they did in the old 707s and DC-8s, common to the 60s. Valerie Scott, a space setter who's been everywhere, twice and done everything, reads The Happening. The In magazine. Mark Wilson labors on a corporate report to his company's stockholders. At age 32, he has hit the top of the heap and wants to stay there. In-flight duties keep stewardess Betty Hamilton on the go. An ID tag to check on 11-year-old Barry Lockridge, shipping tags on Barry's dog, Chipper, and on Alexander Fitzhugh's top-secret courier valise. Picture 2. In the spaceship's command module, an experienced two-man crew maintains an alert for variations in the mass of electronic aids to navigation available to them. On board, oscilloscopes monitor engine performance. Sophisticated X-Factor computers preset engine cut-in shutdown times. Steve Burden, the pilot, and co-pilot Dan Erickson have been up before. Both are old hands, through new to the London shuttle. And that's the way it was. At 0137 Greenwich Mean Time, a routine flight. Then it happened. The unexpected. Even as Columbus was not the first to discover all the new, in a new world, new confrontations occur, even today, in the ionosphere. Dan diverted his attention from his instruments to the viewport. Ahead, on a collision course, was a huge green fireball, glowing and growing in size as it closed in on the spaceliner. Picture 3. The co-pilot turned to his SC, spaceship commander, to ask an opinion. "What is it?" Dan shouted. "I don't know." Steve tried to keep his cool. "But help me. We're out of control. It's drawing us in like a magnet. Give me a hand." Picture 4. Outside, a rolling mess of dust or flame or gas enveloped Flight 612. The ship lurched violently and a high-pitched whine filled the cabin. Number 612 had run into a solar storm that sent everyone and everything sprawling. And then it was over, as suddenly as it had started. An eerie blue fog settled in around them. Steve relaxed and spoke in reassuring tones over the intercom. "This is Captain Burden. We are now approaching London re-entry. The turbulence you have experienced is over." Picture 5. The city beneath them in the fog wasn't London. Some curious space warp enmeshed them in another time, another place. Radar environment controlled landing had provided a sweet touchdown. Captain, crew, and passengers all breathed a sigh of relief. But the ship started rising. Something lifted it into the air. Slowly, food by terrifying food. Burton saw his craft was being picked up as if it were a toy by a giant whose features were those of a quizzical boy. Picture 6. Ignition, Steve commanded his partner. Full power! He was on the edge of panic. Dan gave Burton everything he could from the main thrusters. Success! The sudden burst of energy dislodged the ship from the giant's grasp. Number 612 soared like a sparrow among Empire State-sized trees, evading the alien lead chasing after them. Their escape, however, was short-lived. A power failure left them no choice but a forced landing in the forest. Picture 7. Alexander FitzHugh, though dressed in the uniform of a Navy commander, was an embezzler, a fugitive from the law. In his valise, $1 million. Police officers waited in London for the arrival of flight number 612. And FitzHugh knew it. Alone among the ship's passengers, FitzHugh saw the ship's unscheduled stop as an opportunity. When one is tense and anxious, he has put two options, fight or flight. Alexander FitzHugh was no fighter. He stepped from the exit hatch, confident in his determination for freedom. Childish curiosity had not been a factor in his plans. Barry and Chipper followed FitzHugh into the foggy and ill-defined forest. VIEW-MASTER Reel 2, Picture 8. FitzHugh was furious at this intrusion upon his flight from justice. He ordered the boy back to the ship, though both man and boy now realized a return would be difficult. "Are we lost, sir?" Barry questioned. FitzHugh was puzzled. "We must be farther out of London than I thought." "Nothing but trees," Barry whispered. "Real big trees." Picture 9. Betty Hamilton dutifully reported the disappearance of her two passengers to Steve Burton. The crew knew the dangers that lurked outside the cabin. They'd seen with unbelieving eyes. Burton had ordered all passenger viewports closed when first they ran into trouble to diminish the threat of panic aboard ship. His course was clear. He had to attempt a rescue. Power cells were being recharged. A take-off without FitzHugh and Barry Lockridge was unthinkable. He ran from the command module and into the night. The space set lives on excitement, so it was with Valerie Scott. She trailed after Steve for kicks. The chance for something new. Something new she got. Stumbling from the tangle of jungle-like undergrowth, the two searchers in a strange world discovered a giant box. Picture 10. A giant box carefully placed in the roots of a tree, with screen mesh ports on top and sides. The front seemed completely open without wall or door. "Hey, what's that?" Valerie asked excitedly. "Whatever it is, leave it alone," Burton advised. "I'll try radio contact with Dan." His advice fell on deaf ears, however. Well, space setter instincts excluded caution. She had no proper interest in survival. Gaily she marched into the box, almost in rebellion. Steve rushed in to pull her out, but in the struggle that followed, a trap in the floor released. A door shut tight on the box. They were prisoners. Picture 11. Answers to questions like, "What sort of box is this, and is there no escape?" were fast in coming. A bearded, bespectacled giant bent over them. He wore the white jacket of a lab technician, the studied look of a scientist. Picture 12. Steve put two and two together. It was obvious they'd fallen into some sort of insect trap, a specimen box. The giant entomologist gathered up his catch and headed out of the forest. With each step, block by block, it became increasingly evident that they were approaching the suburbs of a major city. Their captor entered a clinically clean, immense building. Little doubt it was a laboratory. He placed Steve and Valerie on a lab table. Picking up a textbook, he searched for comparative data on his find, CA below, and then left the room for a discussion with an attractive, though tall, assistant. Picture 13. The will to live is strong. Steve pried a way through the mesh, using a twig as a crowbar. Together, the earthlings slipped out of the box, sketch B, but in swinging down off a shelf, C, they knocked over a test tube and alerted the giant to the fact that something was up. They found no place to hide, safe behind a microscope, is shown in D, scant protection from a giant. Not enough anyway. The bug hunter quickly located them, and needing tighter security, he dropped them into a specimen jar. Picture 14. Content that the specimens had been put in safe storage, the giant entomologist and his assistant busied themselves with preparations for a series of laboratory experiments planned for the human bugs, who were about 6 inches tall in relation to their new environment. By way of comparison, the distance from tabletop to floor seemed to be 40 feet to Steve and Valerie. Quite a drop, you'll admit. With all test equipment in readiness, the monster scientist returned for a final examination of the live samples of a life form unique to the land of the giants. He took them from his test tube, held them a moment as he studied them with the aid of a magnifying glass, and then handed the odd earth people to his assistant. VIEW-MASTER Reel 3, Picture 15. She taped them, one at a time, to glass slides on the lab table, though Steve and Valerie struggled against the inevitable. With that curious detachment seen only in men of science, the giant accepted a scalpel from the hand of his lab assistant. If you've ever dissected a frog in biology class, you've already guessed at what was coming. Picture 16. Confusion had been king back at the ship. As so often happens, however, the worst brings forth the best in man. A rescue party, organized by Dan Erickson, had improvised crude weapons for the fight against unknown odds. Mark Wilson had fashioned 2 hatchets from a giant-sized razor blade found discarded in the forest. Betty had bent a safety pin into a grappling hook. Yankee know-how produced spears made of giant matches and shingly nails. Alexander Fitzhugh, who with Barry had found the path back to the space liner after losing his $1 million valise in the woods, had been no help to the total effort. "It's pathetic," he muttered. a group of tiny Tims trying to attack a world of giants with broken razor blades and matchsticks. The orphan boy, who had befriended FitzHugh, urged his companion to join the team. This suggestion fell flat. Commander FitzHugh thought of only one thing: escape. To him, that called for action quite different than a rescue attempt. This gun says, "We're taking off right now without burdening Miss Scott." He exploded, leveling a pearl-handled revolver at the band of space travelers. Dan ignored the threat of gunplay. FitzHugh couldn't shoot the one who could pilot the spaceship. Rescue gear in hand, Dan moved off down the trail, and the others followed his lead, brushing FitzHugh aside. Picture 17. After arduous hours, each blade of grass a fir tree to them, each crag a ravine, each stair-step a mountain to climb. The party reached the lab. Dan and Mark decided a diversion was necessary were they ever to reach the tabletop and free Steve and Valerie. Mark, seeing the flexible gas houses feeding a two-burner stove, scrambled into the next room. He hacked away with his razor hatchet until an odious gas hissed from the hose. Then, quite calmly, Mark lit a human-sized matchbook and blew the blaze to smithereens. While the giants sought fire extinguishers, Erickson crawled up to the table, aided by the homemade grappling hook and a knotted rope. He swiftly released Valerie and Steve from the specimen slides. Picture 18. Knowing the diversion was, at best, temporary, it was full speed ahead. The threesome lowered themselves from the table with the rope down to the floor, out the door. Picture 19. "We'll never make it," Mark mused. But Steve and Dan were not easily discouraged. A gutter train presented an escape route. If they could make it across the street. Out of the smoke-filled lab, a giant figure emerged. He clutched a net in his hands. The scientist was determined he wouldn't lose a prize like the one he'd held at the point of his knife. A skillfully aimed net, and Dan was trapped. Help sometimes comes from the most unlikely of sources. FitzHugh ran into the street, waving his revolver in the air. He decided to go down with the ship. Blazing aimlessly away, lucky FitzHugh creased the giant's leg. Though the injury was minor, it was painful, and it bought the members of flight number 612 all the time they required. Time to release Dan, time enough to reach the gutter drain. Once inside the pipe, the heroic band looked back and saw that a giant hand, grasping and groping, probed after them in the darkness. But for the first time in what had seemed days, they were able to breathe a sigh of relief. Pictures 20. Chipper ran on ahead as they wandered the dampened street drain system. He began to bark. There was light in the darkness, a way out. The relative security of the forest beckoned them. Here there was more promising cover, a chance they might find their way back to the ship. FitzHugh smiled as he picked up $100 bill. A trail of greenbacks led them on a paper chase to the gribbled craft. FitzHugh realized money's true worth, perhaps for the first time in his life. Picture 21. In the forest clearing where First Date crashed, a new cooperation existed. Everyone worked. The girls made lean-to shelters of leaves. Steve, Dan, and Mark worked on the control panels and the radio equipment damaged in the forced landing. Hope steered anew. You know, Mark confided in Steve and Dan. I'm beginning to believe we'll make it. I don't know, Dan wrinkled his brow. No one knows we are here, and we don't know where we are. It's more than 50-50 we won't make it. And if we don't, Steve said, well, all things are relative. On Earth, insects smaller than we somehow survive. If they can, we can. We'll make it here.